Okay, if we have the meeting come to order, please. Whitney, would you take roll?
Dick Withnell,
Here.
Duncan Wise,
Here.
Hannah Vandering,
She's stepped out for a moment. She had to make a phone call, so she's actually here.
Pam Curtis,
Here.
and Ron Saxton is excused.
Okay. Just a brief comment on our, I pulled this out, that what we're all about here. The purpose for the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee, we decided, was to focus state and local investment on OEIB, Oregon Investment Board, adopted outcomes, and to track the state's progress toward the 40-40-20 goal. Okay, so Whitney, you're up to bat.
All right, so what we are doing today is starting the first in a series of 3 meetings where the time will be dedicated to having presentations from various agencies, boards, commissions, others that we've invited to identify their top 3 to 4 priorities for education investment, and complete a template for us that you all, the subcommittee, helped design. And so those templates came in very late, so you received them yesterday, and they're all in your packet. I apologize for the fact that you only received them yesterday, but I think the presentations that will come to you right now will really help to lay the groundwork and walk through. And then this is going to be an iterative process, so we'll have time as we move on in the next few months. If there are questions, we can bring some of these folks back and ask questions. We can move into a process of bringing different agencies together, asking them what it might look like to combine some of these priorities. We'll have feedback from the equity subcommittee that will help us refine as well. And so this is really just the start of our conversation, but I think we're going to be beginning with the Oregon Department of Education and some really strong transformational ideas that will be presented by Rob Saxton and his team. So I think with that, we can go ahead and dive in. Can you hear us okay, Pam?
Yes, sorry, I was talking to the mute button. Yes, I can hear you.
No, that's okay. Just let us know. Just text me or speak up at any point if you can't hear the presenters.
Great, I will, and thank you. I just want to also tell the chair, because I didn't have a chance to do this, I'm just going to be able to be on for the first 60 minutes.
Okay, very good.
So, and we are starting, Pam, with the ODE budget recommendations slide set. I think you have it.
Great. I do. Thank you so much.
Great. Members of the committee, I'm Rob Saxton, Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction for Oregon, and with me are a couple of wonderful members of the team at the Oregon Department of Education, Karen Twain and Sarah Pope. And we're going to make a presentation on 4 priority strategies, and those 4 are a K-3 reading strategy, school and district turnaround strategy, 9th grade on track, and then equity for ELL students. And we're going to start off today with our highest priority, which would be the K-3 reading program. And to be quite honest, if we were going to choose one and only one thing that we would want to focus on, it would be the kindergarten through grade 3 reading program. And really some extension beyond just K-3 into early childhood. And I'm going to turn it over to Karen Twain, who's been working on this. And I need to let you all know that Karen was a principal for me in Tiger Tualatin at Metzger Elementary, and then in our alternative program. And Karen not only was a wonderful principal, but she actually put many of the kinds of things that we're going to talk about into actual practice. And so she is a great expert in what we're talking about here. So Karen.
Thank you, Rob, and thanks to the committee for this opportunity to talk about this. As Rob said, I'm Karen Twain, and right now I'm the Director of Literacy over at the Oregon Department of Ed. We place a lot of emphasis on this reading initiative and concept for the simple reason that we truly believe that in order to realize 40-40-20, we need to have everybody reading in the state. And so I want to start by talking about the sort of 4 main components of this plan. The first one is full-day kindergarten, which, as you know, goes into effect to where districts can no longer charge a fee or tuition in 2015. So there are many districts using full-day kindergarten right now, but they actually have to charge their families and students in order to have it. And so, again, starting 2015, they can no longer do that. And so those who have seen a lot of progress because of full-day kindergarten in their schools will make it just part of their program, and families can just come and utilize it. So what we have seen basically with full-day kindergarten is that a half day is not enough. Kids are there for about 2.5 hours in a full-day, or excuse me, in a half-day program, and there's not enough time to really deliver some literacy instruction or instruction of any kind that's suitable to move kids to first grade. So this is a really important part, and we'll also talk a little bit about what full-day kindergarten really means and actually starting before full-day kindergarten, because we've been working with early learning to figure out what that should really look like. The second part of it is increased time and intensity to improve the core, and what I mean the core is that is your literacy instruction that you have during the day, and so that might be for 60-90 minutes, but we're going to be really working with the districts in terms of what that could or should look like, and districts that have had success. And the important part of this for both the core program and their intervention program is that there's more time and intensity that we're able to work on closing the achievement gap. So that is, again, a huge piece. The next thing is really around professional development. And what we've seen is you can't just go and tell a district, here's what it should look like, good luck. You really need to provide support with people who have done it before and really understand all the components of it, and help districts with that professional development piece. And then the last one is one that we're learning actually a lot from early learning, which is to really engage families and communities. And again, with the idea of maybe starting some of our kids who need the most before kindergarten, we would really engage community-based organizations to help us with that. So it's not all on schools, it's a real team effort between parents, community, and the schools. And I guess what I really want to say is that the overarching theme around all four of these components is that we get equitable outcomes. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit as we go through, but really the focus is on equity in this plan. It's critical.
Karen, I just ask, what's the additional benefit of the full-day kindergarten to daycare and the cost of daycare for those that are unemployed or that type of thing? I mean, there's got to be an economic benefit there.
Oh, sure,
So,
yeah. I mean,
but I would give that. To help sell that downstream or upstream to the communities, I think we need to say that there's a whole bunch of economic, not only the benefit that you just said and that you're going to go into, but there's also a very big economic benefit for families and stuff. So
there is for sure. I've been careful about, I want to state it correctly, because what I don't want people to feel like that full-day kindergarten is replacing childcare. You know what I mean? And so, but you're right.
But
in
it
terms
is,
of
though.
cost benefit. Yeah, except this has an instructional piece.
Oh, no, of course, no, of course. But then there's the dollar savings there.
Sure.
So I'm curious, how do we latch on to those dollars that are saved to do other educational things?
Sure.
So.
Yeah, I don't have an exact cost on it.
Yeah.
I think part of the conversation around full day also is, in Oregon, you don't have to send your child to school until they're 7 years old.
Okay.
So we don't have mandatory kindergarten. And this is one of the issues on one of the committees I served on regarding kindergarten, was some parents don't want to send their children to school. So it's one of those, when you talk about time and you talk about full day or full year-round school, parents' commitment, the community is something. I think that as we're implementing full-day kindergarten, this will be a change that will be very welcome by many, but it will be something that some will not want to partake in. So it's just.
Could we buy a series of Who Moved My Cheese books?
Yeah.
Pass them out when we're.
Yeah, the vast majority are saying they have their kids in a full-time preschool or daycare,
Mhm.
and then they come to a 2.5-hour educational program in kindergarten. And for most people, clearly that's a draw. So as you mentioned, it's serious, but we need to latch on to the kids who need it the most.
Mhm.
I mean, that's really the bottom line.
Gotcha.
Okay, so just to kind of illustrate the point, I think this is a little bit difficult to see up there, but I could. Okay,
They
oh,
have
that's
it.
right. All right, so, I mean, the bottom line here is, we have about 66% of our kids that are hitting their reading benchmark in 3rd grade throughout the state. And if you disaggregate the data and really look at our different groups of color, our special ed kids, and our ELLs and economically disadvantaged, it's not data that we want. Our Black and Hispanic groups are less than 50% measured as reading. And that decreases their chances of a lot of things if they can't read by 3rd grade. So Pacific Islanders at about 55, so they're above, but we range in between, right around 50 for a lot of kids of color. So, you know, one of the main points is that, and this is what's really driving this, it is hard to talk about graduation rates. It's hard to talk about 4420 without talking about 3rd grade reading, because if you're a 3rd grade reader, you have 4 times more likelihood of graduating. So if you really let that sink in, you know, particularly again, our kids of color who are less than 50%, I mean, that's pretty astounding to think about what their graduation rate's going to be as they go up. And it's hard to think about these things at such an early age, but again, early learning has really taught us we've got to close the opportunity and the achievement gaps early on. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard to get to the graduation rates that we desire. In terms of the impact, we believe that if we could, you know, utilize this plan in its fullest across the state, that we will see some real differences. And the way we would do that is to look at the 3rd grade reading assessment statewide, but also, you know, that doesn't happen until 3rd grade, so you need some measures along the way, you know, kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade. And there's a couple measures out there right now that are used pretty frequently and that we have some good background data on. One is Easy CBM and the other is DIBBLS. We're looking at others. In particular, we're looking to find some that measure Spanish literacy so that we're not asking Spanish readers to take an English assessment and then say that they can't read. Because in truth, many of them can if they're given the right assessment. So we want to look at that and use those assessments to be able to plan moving forward. And then the final thing, and this is really important too, is that we need to look at special ed identification rates, because if we, kids are being identified fairly early into special ed, and again, particularly kids of color or non-English speakers, and we believe heavily that those rates will drop. Kids won't be identified as often, and we've seen that in a number of districts, so that we're going to look at those rates as well. What does it look like for special ed? You know, we want to look at this investment in a few different ways. But again, you know, the best, the highest bang for the buck, the best value will be to do this across the state. And we believe that we can take that rate of 66%, which is last year, and raise it into the 90s, and frankly, as high as 95%, if we did all the components of this. And what we see across the state is a lot of school districts or schools will use 1 or 2 things, maybe 3 things, but there's very few doing all 4. And so that we really, well, we know from experience, which I'll get to, that it can really make a difference. And the idea to get 95% of our kids reading by 3rd grade, again, just changes the whole ballgame. It means that our graduations will go up, you know, in terms of kids thinking about college, all those things will improve. You know, the medium would be to think about maybe 10% of the schools in the state and have some sort of targeted idea. We did some mathematical genius work around that and figured that it would bump us up by about 8%. So 66 plus 8. And to me, it's good, but it's not enough. So that's kind of our medium. And then low would be to pilot in a few places, and we think there'd be a small jump. But again, getting that 40-40-20, we really want to think about, you know, the highest investment possible. And then,
Excuse me, but I think you also need to, in the same breath, some of the things that Duncan's doing, we need to talk about the economics of this, what it does for economic, and then also don't you go out to juvenile delinquency and you go out, so you got, I mean, you're talking about a pretty good, you say bang for your buck, I mean, that's multiples, significant multiples. And the idea though, just doing 10% someplace, I think that, this is kind of a little bit strong language, but I've had an opportunity to do some business in Poland, and what you do is you get to play Auschwitz. Yes, 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 no, 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 yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
tough
and
choices.
that's not, if we're talking about widgets maybe, but not people, so.
yeah, I think that's a great point. I mainly focused on graduation rates, but you could talk about, you know, the economic impact on what kind of jobs these kids will get when they're adults. You could talk about incarceration levels. You could talk about a lot of things and the social and economic impact it has in our community.
I think we shouldn't discount though the fact that we still have to sell this all the time.
Absolutely.
See the value of it all the time. We have to keep thinking that way.
Yeah,
These are some people out there that say, you know, whatever.
no, you're absolutely right. So we talked about closing gaps as early as possible with early identification, and what we mean by that is to start students, if we can ID them, and we think we can through some of our early learning channels, find out who these kids are, and before they even show up on the first day of kindergarten, bring them in the summer and with their families, and have a really nice holistic approach where we're helping families know what it means to have their kid enter kindergarten, work with community-based organizations who have already had some success, both helping the families and also give some instruction. So when that kid walks in on the first day, they just don't feel so far behind. There's a real difference there in terms of esteem and what it can mean for families. But get these families and kids acclimated to you know, schools and what they look like. So we would do that in the summer, and then the big thing about full-day kindergarten, which is the next step after that summer, is again that what teachers tell us is that it finally gives them time to get in with kids and do the things that they need to. So you end up identifying your kids who are the most neediest, have the lowest literacy skills, the kids who really need a lot of time and instruction around it. Go faster.
No, I was
Oh.
waving this. Sorry.
All right. I didn't know it was this. Okay, so.
And it's 25 minutes in and we've got a zillion things to hear, so.
Okay.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's true, you're right.
So in any case, teachers say, I need this time. This is the most important time. I don't want them to wait till first grade to have to get, you know, X, Y, and Z, the interventions, the core instruction. It's too late, and those gaps are already widened, and you know, they're just bigger. So the full day K really gets it done. And just, I know a couple of you heard this last week when Rob and I presented in JADA, but we've seen this. I know it as a building principal, Rob saw it as a superintendent, but I can speak personally that in my school, when we had a family liaison, so we had the family and community piece to it, when we had full day kindergarten, when we lined up a really bang up literacy program, I was in a high poverty, high ELL, lots of kids of color, and we hit into the 90s in terms of our third grade reading benchmark. So I know it can be done because we've done it. And Tiger Tualatin, which mirrors the state and demographics, did it as a district, and we're into the 90s as well. So we know it can be done. And I know I'm short on time, but I don't want to skip over the equity lens because it's the most important piece. And that is we really need to focus on our students of color. And if we don't, we're doing a real disservice to the state. So we're talking about culturally responsive teaching strategies that we would deliver through professional development, have people understand that there's many components to that in terms of engaging families and knowing who those kids are when they come in the door and how you really instruct them appropriately. We need to develop our assessments around native language, make sure kids are being assessed in their home language. And then, as we already mentioned, increase the time and intensity, especially for our students who have already experienced the opportunity gap at a very, very young age.
I wish you used the language instead of saying kids that are, the kids would be, showing the kids a real disservice. You're talking about you're going to cost me a hell of a lot of money if we don't, too, also.
So I have a
Yes.
question. So the investment is to invest in full-day kindergarten, or there's something further that you're looking at in this proposal?
Yeah, good question. So it is full-day kindergarten. And then it's also some curriculum, or possibilities for districts to purchase curriculum. It would have, a menu of possibilities of this is how you increase time and possibilities. It's getting some money into the community-based organizations' hands, and it is having the professional development.
And then also, Hannah, it's a really intensive literacy program from just prior to kindergarten all the way to the end of third grade.
Okay, so when you say that, because we're moving to full-day kindergarten, and I just want to make sure that we're moving to full-day kindergarten that's a well-rounded full-day kindergarten. It's not we're going to drill and kill on this issue, but we're going to make sure that you want to be in school.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I'm looking at the program, and I appreciate this work, and I think it's really important. But I also am tired of hearing that we're not going to have recess, and we're not going to have any center time, and we're not going to do this, because that's not what's best for kids. There's
For sure not. And that would be part of the professional development. When we had the full-day K Summit, we talked a lot about that you still need guided play in there. You still need that time for the kids to be joyful and happy. And I sent someone up to Metzger, actually, from ODE yesterday, and she observed, and she said, it's way different when you look at it on paper than when you see it. She said those kids were excited. They were all over the place. They took their learning on. It was just completely different than I sort of envisioned. And it's hard to communicate that. We need to find ways to do it. But yeah, no, it should be a very happy place where kids are really excited about learning, and families.
Duncan?
So the goal, you don't have to tell me on the goal, but I think kind of where Hannah is. The question is the strategy.
Yeah.
And again, on the tight loose, how much are we going to prescribe versus how much are we going to allow schools to try different models? And I don't know the answer to that. That would be the question I have. And do we have good data today that we're spotlight, as you've done Tiger? I've heard the Tiger story. Ron did a great job. But we can really look at individual schools to see what's working. And frankly, those that are working well, I don't know that we want to put a prescriptive. I think ideally what you want is to have a school that does what Hannah's describing and hitting the reading targets. And my guess is there are a lot of ways to get there. I mean, and we need to make sure we're allowing that variation.
We're basing this on the success that those schools are realizing.
Right, I understand, but still the question is it one model or is it multiple models? And are we prescribing or are we allowing the schools to do their own models? And I don't have an answer to that because I'm with you. We need to achieve the goal.
Right.
But I think we also, under our whole theory of innovation and tight loose, and frankly, because of what Hannah says, if we drill to this specific goal at the cost of all else and the schools feel that, then you do have the risk of having us crowding out other important activities. So I think I would, again, totally behind this goal. The question I would have is what is our framing of this as we talk with the schools, and how do all these pieces come together in a community and the final thing, again, back to full day kindergarten, and I guess we'll get to this, but I know we've gotten a lot. That's obviously a hugely expensive item. And I guess Brian or somebody will tell us what that's going to cost, but that's huge. I mean, and are we comparing that with other options in the early childhood area in particular, of things we might be able to invest in and potentially get even better results? I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's clearly in this budget process going to be one of the big questions, because that one item alone, I'm just thinking of what's the number, Brian? It's full day.
It's about
200 million. I mean, 200 million in my other world, in higher ed, for example, that's just a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
So Duncan, I hear what you're talking about. One of the, it's sort of interesting to fill out the template and then sort of try to deliver on what it is that we're talking about when we're talking about the totality of this plan. But to get specific about the questions, what we believe are that there are lots of different ways to approach literacy and get really strong outcomes for kids, but there are also components within strong literacy programs that are the same in every program. It isn't that you have to do it this way, but here are the components that are a part of every strong literacy program. And there ought to be an expectation that the literacy programs that get delivered have those components contained within them. And then there's a variety of ways to get at that, but those need to be evidenced in those programs if we have any expectation that we're really going to get around the 95% outcome rate that honestly I believe we can get to, but it takes a full day, it takes some work before kindergarten, it takes full day kinder, and it takes really high quality evidence-based literacy programs, and then it takes a complete commitment to equity and efforts to get at that, and school support and involvement in the community. I believe when you get there across the board, you can get to 95%.
So just to follow up if I might, just to get, and again, this probably is a longer conversation. So you're thinking then that you would say, I'm just making this up, so you have a pot of money that you would have available for all those activities, and say to each district, we'll release that money when you come up with that plan that answers those questions. So it'll be basically a contract between you and the district, both with the measures and the practice, and you would sign off, but you allow each community to do it. Is that what you're imagining?
That's exactly right.
And then we support them, and then...
There's support and training, and then there also is a look at progress. With supported progress is not evidence.
That'll be a new model.
Yes, it will.
Well, we got to break that 66%.
No, I'm here. I just want to have to really think about how that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's very intriguing because it's obviously going to require a whole lot of.
And there's always this balance between, we've got to get kids reading and how are we going to go about it. I know this, school's not fun if you can't read and you can't access any other content after third grade because everybody's going to expect you to read to access content. I can't learn about social studies or science or math if I'm in fifth grade and I can't read. And so other investments beyond that really become futile if we get to that place where we don't have kids that are readers.
So Pam, I just want to give you the opportunity. I think we're about wrapping up the K-3 reading investment piece, and I just wondered if you had any questions or if we should just move along.
I have a thought. I'd like it to be a question, and so maybe I just make the comment, and maybe Karen or Rob could respond. I think this is very intriguing, and I'm really interested. What I'm thinking through is that it's K-3 for the purposes of third grade reading, but it's also this ready-to-read component that happens in the early learning space.
Right.
And we know that if you just take early learning and fast forward it into K or K-3, it doesn't work. We also know if you take a K-3 paradigm and shove it back into early learning, that doesn't work. So it's a meeting of these two cultures, and it's a meeting of communities where parents and kids live before they get to K-3. And so I'm just trying to think through how you implement the strategies that you're proposing in a way that respects and blends the cultures. Because if you just come at it through K-3, which is where you understandably are and live, it doesn't work without that other side of the handshake. So it's just a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, as I think Jada would tell you, we're working quite closely and collaboratively to make sure that it's a seamless system. And we have a long way to go, but we're talking about what can early learning bring to the table to schools and vice versa, so that we're having conversations. Here's what we know about the little guys, and here's what we need to know once they get there, and how can we bridge that together. So without getting deep into strategies, there is a lot of conversation going on about it, and we're working very closely together to solve some of those issues. But one isn't going to work with the other, like you stated.
And Pam, I would just say...
Yeah, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, even just if we're talking about identification of who it is that we're going to begin working with summer prior to K to make sure that we close gaps on the achievement kindergarten assessment. is just a big piece of the work. So there's all kinds of need to be thoughtful.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I guess I would just really encourage us to think about how hubs and their community providers get connected to this as the early childhood side of Handshake. We're working really hard to get those set up and operational. So they're supposed to be the sort of the one-stop shop to at least coordinate the early childhood side of the Handshake, and I would just invite you to think through that issue, put your strategy together.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
It seems to me, this is Whitney, it seems to me there's this great opportunity in having people design these kindergarten before programs to have the hub be the delivery system for that with the kindergarten teachers engaged, and that there could be some real innovative work to connect those two through something that is a real bridge program.
Well, just to follow this up once more, I mean, what if you say the deal is you release all the money for all of that when you have a comprehensive plan you got to sign off on for 3 to 3?
Which includes your local provider.
All the local providers, and it's the whole system, right? So you don't fund the nonprofits, they have to figure that out locally, but you have to be convinced that there is a good strategy and you'll measure it. I mean, that's a 3 to 3 strategy by some definition of what the community is. I think that's intriguing.
We have to be real careful about the type. This is feeling a lot tight to me. And I love what you say about there has to be all components, and I believe that to be true. And I think as we're rolling this out, as we're working on it, absolutely need to see improvements. But we haven't allowed people to build over the last decade. We haven't allowed them to really do what they believe is right in so many cases, because they've been told, here's the curriculum, use it with fidelity, that word. So I get we want to see a plan in place. It might be different at Metzger than it is at Lowe's. It might be different. So I think we just have to keep in mind we're a very diverse state. I'll go back to our forum over in Eastern Oregon. Don't tell us what to do until you know who we are and what we're doing successfully. Then let's have the conversation. So I appreciate the work on it. I know DIBELS, EasyCBM, DRAs, all those things, and people have different opinions about those and whether they're effective or not. And I think you have to trust the professional discretion as well.
Okay.
So doing a quick time check, I'll
Yes.
let you wrap, and then we probably better move into the next.
So I always have to show this graph because I just can't help myself. So, one of the things, I learned this the hard way, quite honestly, and so you'll see that when you have a literacy program, which everybody has a literacy program, what you see over time, if that was over the course of 4 years, what you basically see is that kids come in, you implement the literacy program, and you get outcomes, and there's a really slight, maybe, increase in the kinds of outcomes that you get with students. Then in places where folks have gotten really intensive about evidence-based, and here's what a program like that would look like, what you see is that students begin to make gains. But the important part for people to look at there is that the gap that existed initially still exists. We saw this exactly in my old district, and quite honestly, when we look at the research that's been done by U of O and all kinds of programs that implement, this is exactly what you get. Everybody has growth, but gaps remain, and we've got to close achievement gaps. If you're intentional about pedagogy that's culturally relevant, curricula that's culturally relevant, and you involve community and parents in a really rich way, you actually can get a place where you do close gaps. And instead of sort of these parallel lines, because you spend, there's additional time and effort, and there's additional thought put into support for students who typically have been underserved, you can see gaps close. And we also have evidence of this in places across the state. We really think that we can see these kinds of implementation beginning and gains over 4 years from the initiation of full day K until fourth grade. So we'll leave it with that, and if it's okay with you all, then I would hand it off to Sarah, and she would get on our second strategy, and I think that the others will be a little bit faster.
I talk really fast, so don't worry.
She's gonna try really hard to talk slow.
But also fast. I always end up fast.
Slow but also
Slow and
fast.
fast at the
We
same
listen
time.
Perfect.
fast, it's
So
okay.
members of the committee, I'm Sarah Pogue, Chief of Staff of the department. Our second recommendation for an investment is around school and district turnaround. So key to the OEIB budget recommendations that the board put together is a district and systems accountability. And Chief Education Officer Nancy Golden asked us to do some work in putting together what would that look like. And we've started to assemble the task force, and these are the beginning ideas. And we think this work is critically important. The reason we think it's so important is when you look out over our lowest performing schools, so these are schools in the bottom 5% of our state, we see over 70,000 students attend schools that many of us would never want to send our kids to. And I say that very seriously because you look at their third grade reading scores, you look at their high school graduation rates, and we're talking 40% are reading at grade level. In some places, 30% are graduating from high school. And so it's a critical strategy to ensure that as we're focusing on programs and implementation, we're also looking at systems. And we have a system in place for our focus and priority schools. Through our waiver from No Child Left Behind, we've been able to redirect our title dollars to support 93 focus and priority schools. But we have another 112 schools that fall into the exact same level as focus and priority status, but were not identified through the waiver. And the question is, so what do we do in those places? So what we're recommending doing is focusing in 4 key areas. And those places, those areas are up on the screen right now. We think we need to provide a school or district coach on site for at least a day a week in those additional schools. We think that we need to provide additional resources to fund evidence-based best practices, professional development for educators, and additional time for students. And I want to say, I know this sounds similar to the K-3 literacy focus, but in these schools that are performing in the bottom 5%, it's not going to be enough to just focus on K-3 literacy. There's a whole system at play that's going to need additional leadership coach to ensure that those schools really do make improvements and turn around. We also think it's going to be really important to provide, we like the language around a challenge fund, but to engage tribes and community-based organizations in partnering with parents in the area to also ensure that those schools are turning around. And we're going to have a cohort of schools, our focus and priority, that after their 3 to 4 years are not going to have made progress. And we want the 4th component, we recommend that the 4th component of this work be around increased interventions and accountability in those schools. It's going to be a much, much smaller subset that I'll talk about in a second. So those are the 4 main components of this investment that we're recommending. In terms of the outcomes, it really does impact every single outcome on the achievement impact. We know that in order to measure it, we'll primarily be using our school rating system. So the schools, when I mentioned 112 of them, are identified because they're level 1, and in some places level 2 schools performing in the bottom 5%. And we would know progress when those schools are no longer level 1, or in some cases within low level 2 schools. And the ways we would measure that progress is what goes into the school rating system. It's a combination of our state assessment data based on growth and achievement for all students and for subgroups, and in high schools also including graduation rates for all students and subgroups. We did look at this in terms of various levels, kind of high, medium to low. So you could crack this in a couple different ways. You could invest in the program we just described in all 112 of these schools. We could also say that's fairly expensive, and we think some of that return on investment is better spent on the K-3 literacy, and we could invest in half of the lowest performing schools. We also could just focus the investment on the focus and priority schools that are not making progress after the 3 or 4 years. It's really hard to see this from here, and I even have glasses on, so probably want to draw your attention to the document in front of you, specifically that first line. So of the focus and priority schools, like I said, there's 93 of them. You see the breakdown. We have 52% of the students in our focus and priority schools are students of color. So we see students of color far overrepresented in our focus and priority schools. And you see the percent of those students meeting or exceeding on 3rd grade reading as 42%. And if you drop down to the lowest performing non-title schools, this is where you get a sense of what's going on in high schools, because most high schools are not title schools. And that's where you see we have 39 of these high schools, of which the average graduation rate for all students is less than 34%, and for students of color, it's less than 28%. And when you add up the total of all the students who are in either our focus and priority, our other title or non-title lowest performing, class, we get literally 69,999 students. So in addition to what I just mentioned earlier about students of color being overrepresented in our lowest performing schools, we have started to see progress. So when I mentioned that through our No Child Left Behind waiver, we've been able to use our Title I resources to provide interventions in a far different way than we've done before, and it's working. I'm going to be really specific about what working means. So of the 93 schools, after almost 2 years of supports, half of them are no longer level 1. And our goal is that by next summer, at the end of their third year, 75% would no longer be level 1, and we are well on track to meet that goal. The question is going to be, of the small subset that don't make the progress, what then? Which is why I referenced that fourth item, because we think it's going to take increased supports, interventions, and quite honestly, accountability in those places. In terms of how the strategy aligns to the equity lens, it's going to be really critically important that we get, to Hannah's point, additional resources and supports to places that need it the most. We can't expect all the places that we just identified to do a lot better with less. People aren't intentionally having outcomes that look like that. So we want to provide the supports and interventions, specifically in schools that have high numbers of students of color. We also think that the support and education of parents is going to be critical. We know that in school, a teacher is a child's biggest impact, but outside of school, it's their parents. And last but not least, our state really does need to answer the question of, so how long should we give places to improve? Is 3 years enough? Is 4 years enough? And then what happens? What does the increased support look like in places that after, have just not made progress? So this is the investment on school and district turnaround. And I want to see if there are any questions, and then we'll move on to ninth grade on track.
So the number you shared of the priority schools that are seeing improvement in 2 years, was that 93%?
So 93 schools, 50%. If we were to re-identify, would no longer be level 1 schools.
So what that
45.
tells us is that when you make an investment in schools that are struggling, that you actually see an improvement. So I want to go back to your initial statement because it really burned, it hurt deep as an educator to say that these are schools that I would want to send my child to. This is about their test scores, right?
In
We're measuring by
elementary,
test score.
so how we rate a school is low performing. In elementary school, it's through the state assessment. High school graduation rates are included in high school.
Okay, so we're talking about test scores in the schools of poverty.
And high
schools
school
with-
graduation rates.
Yes. So, well, but we're talking about in our elementary schools.
In elementary schools, correct.
Okay. And we're basing fact on whether a parent would want, I want to see data from parents to say that, because I think that's a statement that's pretty harsh on our schools. And having just looked at the TELS data and what people are saying, I think we need to take a step back and realize what we've been through in Oregon and what we can do. We can set our path. We can do this, but I think we have to be real careful about making statements about what's going on, and we've seen the disinvestment in the schools. So,
I hear what you're saying, and I don't use those words lightly, which is why I made that additional comment. And there's probably other ways I could have framed it, but I think the point is really serious. We have schools with over-concentrations of students of color where literally 60% aren't reading. And we have neighboring schools with similar makeups where we see far greater numbers of students reading. And I fully agree that a state assessment is one indicator of the measure of success in a school. But we were just talking about the importance of early reading, and if we know these third graders aren't reading, it's going to be really hard to engage in content beyond third grade. And so while I definitely agree, I could have said it a little differently, I do really think it's critically important.
And we have schools with 58 students in a kindergarten classroom.
Absolutely.
We've done this to our schools, and I just want us to be really careful. I think, again, on this point of the turnarounds, about how long we give them to improve, I think when you make a real investment and you give them the learning conditions that are appropriate for students, then let's look at the results we're getting. We keep talking about outcomes-based, but the inputs never seem to matter. So as we're doing this work, I really hope that having just completed the TEL survey, that we give districts the opportunities to have those conversations that I believe can really turn some things around, because it's a lot about the culture in the school. It's about the teaching and learning conditions for everyone. So I'm
And Hannah, I really hear what you're saying. I will be honest with you though, that if I thought I was gonna put my child in a high school and put 34% graduation rate in this country, right, just it would really worry me. It's not, it can be about the system, it can be about the funding, it can be about a lot of things that we're talking about, but a 34% graduation rate would be problematic. The other part is too, that with our focus in priority schools, we really feel like the focus in priority schools who have leaned in hard and engaged and been very thoughtful of the work that they're doing are making progress. There are a few that have done that, it's just really incredibly hard work. And we believe that they're going to make progress in the next 2 years. And then there are a few who kind of have said, we don't care what you have to say. We don't want to do what we don't want to engage here. We're not interested in this. And we just flat are going to do what we want to do. And we just can't have, we cannot continue to allow that to happen in a few places. It's not a bunch of places, but there are a few, and we need to recognize that and do something about it.
And let's talk about those specific. Let's not make overarching. I guess that's my fear about what we're trying to do here in Oregon. I think we're really trying to move the dial in education. And when we make statements like that, it really is, I think, detrimental. If we have some people who are not doing the job, just as with our professional growth and evaluation tool, I don't want to teach next to someone who's not doing their job. I don't want an administrator who's not doing their work in my school either. But I think the overarching comments really hurt.
When do you think that we'll be out of the bottom 10 on this ranking that we see in the headlines all the time? That's what I get hit out downtown. How come we're 48th? How come we're 50th? How come we're whatever? When are we going to be in the top 10?
I think with the investments that the subcommittee can recommend, both with a K-3 literacy focus and also with the early learning work you're going to hear about later, and a focus on systems, I think within 4 or 5 years we could see some pretty marked improvements.
Two questions. First, how much are we talking about in terms of dollars?
We were told not
So
to
we
have
have told them that
High, medium, low.
not to bring dollars to the table, but to talk in terms of high, medium, and low. Sort of
Medium, modest,
pervasiveness.
substantial.
Yes.
Is this medium, modest, or substantial?
Well, they propose
a
some
different school level. I'm just trying to
options.
get, okay, so it's
Yeah.
helpful, okay.
Why don't you give them though
A range.
the amount of money that's been spent in the focus and priority schools as a general
Reminder of it.
litmus
So about
test?
50 schools providing a similar level of support to what we've been providing focus and priority schools over biennium would cost approximately $15 million.
5
1.5.
1.5, okay. And the second question, and I understand the complexity. I mean, you're dealing in districts, states coming in, intervening with supports, and you've got the district office, and obviously in a large district, it gets very complex in terms of.
And in Oregon, though, Duncan, you got the school boards, which are.
Well, so I mean, yeah,
Yes.
I mean, so you've got all those interventions have the issue, I mean, we deal with this all the time, but you're going into a school in the context of a district, and the district is there, should be dealing with those schools themselves as part of it, and that gets to hands. And you don't have necessarily all the tools and authorities. So, again, that's probably a larger conversation, but when you talk about after 3 years of working, they're not performing, I mean, who are you as the agent in terms of going in and doing an intervention? What are you thinking about? I mean,
So we've been asked that, when I mentioned the task force that's come together, we've been asked to convene a group of stakeholders, and we actually have 2 various subgroups working on this. One, our waiver group, because we believe the feds are going to ask us this question when it comes to our extension of No Child Left Behind. And we've been asked by Nancy Golden to bring together a group. So we'll have more information by August 1st.
I just, obviously know the complexity of that. You've been there working on it. Okay.
So I'm assuming we could pull for any school that had 50% response rate on the TELS data, our priority
No,
schools.
I think we need to for sure.
Yeah, I'm
Good
thinking,
idea.
so you've got the priority schools, if they completed the TELS to kind of get a sense of where they are. So what do we learn from that? I think would be really
I agree.
fascinating.
Yes. And we have a group that came together and you ask folks in those schools, and we have frequently here, is 4 years is too long. If we're not making progress, move this accountability even earlier.
No.
Because you can't see a child's almost, a quarter of their education pass by without significant improvements.
So we are needing to clip along, as we knew we would. 2 more things, if you could
Yes.
go fairly quickly, but they're
Yes,
important.
I am going to go fairly quickly because I'm supposed to be
You're
in front of
supposed
Senate
to
in
be
5
at
minutes,
Senate
but
Ed, yeah.
It's all right. I have Cindy in there to pitch in if needed. So, I'm going to present on 2 here. One of them is 9th grade on track. And so what I want to do real quickly is kind of describe the mechanism for this and then get into a little bit about what I'm on. So this would be a plan that basically would say we want to target having 9th graders on track with 6 credits prior to the beginning of 10th grade. And prior to the beginning of 10th grade is important because it allows for 2 summers in sort of the high school age range after 8th grade. This would be a formula change within the state school fund. It would it would not require any additional investment. It would just be a redistribution. And basically what happens within this program is that the school delivers additional programs as early as summer after 8th grade year with summer wraparound services via community-based organizations, mentoring, and extended day. And it would need to be a combination of those things and minimum to students who traditionally have been underserved. And I'm defining that in this instance as students who are free and reduced lunch eligible, students of color, special ed eligible, or limited English proficient students, so those 4 categories. And if the historically underserved student is provided with those services, the summer school, mentoring, the CBO wraparound, and or extended day, and then is on track at the end of 9th grade, then the district would receive an additional .045 ADMW for that student. So it really is an incentive kind of program. And with that is approximately $290 per student. And again, it's not new money, it's a redistribution of money because it's through the current ADM formula. And then if the student also attends more than 90% of the days, then the district receives an additional .005 ADMW, which is approximately $50 a student. So the combination of I offer the services to the underserved student, we earn 6 credits, and we attend 90% of the time would be a .05 ADMW addition for the district. Currently, the graduation rate among students of color in the state varies somewhere between 50.8% and 59.5%, depending on how we disaggregate the data based on race. And the proposal supports improved graduation rates, ensuring that more 9th graders are on track. We know that we could measure this really pretty quickly, right, by looking at what percent of students of 9th graders are on track. Now, that's a new data set that we'll have for the first time that we think that we can vet and say is accurate this fall. And then also, what do our high school graduation rates actually look like? Because we believe that when you're on track in 9th grade, there's a higher likelihood that you'll graduate 4 years or 5 years later. Again, this is not a new investment, it just is a redistribution of investment. And we've looked at various data and done some regression analysis at the state to try to figure out what seems to have the biggest impact on graduation. I thought this was an incredibly interesting graph, mostly because of how steep it is between 100% attendance and 85% attendance. So for students that attend if I go to 82% of the time, students that attend 82% of the time have a 50% likelihood of graduation. That's attendance in their 9th grade year. If you go up to 85, you have a 56% likelihood that they'll graduate. At 90%, 72% likelihood that they'll graduate. And by the time you get to 95%, there's an 86% likelihood that they'll graduate. We find this to be the highest correlation between high school graduation and just about any other measurement that we can find, including outcomes on 8th grade reading and 8th grade math. And so there is a really high correlation here, and so those 2 things are important. When we look at this, basically districts would receive the redistribution in the state school fund, and it would follow the students. And of course, so districts that have higher numbers of students in the 4 categories that I identified, students who are in poverty or who qualify for free and reduced, or ELL, or students of color, or have an IEP, would be winners. And then other districts that have lower percentages likely would receive less funding. So evidence of this, right now, there's a brand new national study that just came out in time for us to do this report. Actually, I didn't have this the other day when I did it, that showed that students who are on track after 9th grade graduation, so they have 6 credits, are 4 times more likely to graduate from high school. Chicago recently completed a study where they began an intensive effort on this in 2007, and their graduation rate from 2012 to 2013 went from 57% to 82%, and their entire focus was on 6th grade credit earning. So 9th grade credit earning, let's say. 6 credits, 9th grade credit earning. Sorry.
What were those numbers again, Ron?
It was from 57% to 82%. Really impressive. Portland Public did something similar a few years back and also saw some really startling results. And I think Carol, actually, I talked to Carol Smith about this, and she said their data showed 5 times more likely to graduate high school. And so it's, that the national study is 4 times. Districts with, as I already said, would be winners who have that high number of students. So I did some quick calculations because I wanted to understand how this can interplay with the state school fund. And basically, it would increase the number of DMW that exists in the state by about 1,400 students. So if you did this and you maximize the number of students that could do it and then the additional 0.05 weight, it would redistribute about $9.5 million within the current state school fund. So it's not a huge redistribution, but it does bring a focus and it does give school districts dollars to focus on specific kinds of outcomes. If there are questions.
Can I ask you a typical lay question? On the graduation rate or the attendance rates, how about the extracurricular activities? Drama, music, sports. What's the hook that kept a lot of us in school? Is that poo-poo? You don't have to worry about that now.
There's tons of research on that as well.
Completely important. It's a very important component about how you make sure that students are connected to school. And so, one of the parts of this is, if you're thinking that if I can increase graduation rates or if I can increase, students who are on track at the end of 9th grade, there's some additional dollars that are available. What can I do that will cause that to happen? So as a district, that would be the kind of thinking that we want to incent in a different way. And there are things, this is one of those that I knew as a district superintendent when we wanted to, there were actually things that we could do, that we could implement if we resourced it, that would cause students to be more likely to have earned 6 credits. And some of it was engagement, some of it was summer school opportunity where credits could be earned, some of it was different kinds of homework support and so forth, because we knew that we can increase the likelihood a student would earn a credit.
And Dick, one thing that happens if kids don't have enough credits, they're not eligible by OSAA. So it has a really awful effect. You fall behind in credit and you get dropped from the team. And then you never get that
And you're in trouble, or you charge too much, or whatever the case may be,
Right.
so kids don't participate.
Right.
So I don't want to rush you, but I do want you to be able to
Yep.
tell us about the last one
Okay.
before you
I'll
have
hit
to
the last
run.
one. This one will be the most controversial.
This
And-
is exciting.
So the next one is, and within this one there are lots of different components, and there are components that could be accepted or rejected on a piece-by-piece basis, right? So I just want to lay that out up front, but I'm going to lay it out for you in its totality, and then people can think about what they like or don't, or whether or not they want to keep the entire package. So this is really about trying to improve outcomes for English language learners. And so step 1 within the plan here, and I'll kind of lay this out as I did the last one, would be an increase from 0.5 to 0.6 extra weight for ELL. So right now, when a student is identified as ELL, a district gets a weight of 1.5. So this would increase it by 1/10 to 1.6. The district can receive the additional weight. So when students come in and they are clearly ELL, they receive an assessment called the ELPA, English Language Proficiency Assessment. And they're a level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. If a student arrives and is a level 1 or a level 2, then the district would receive the additional 0.6 weight for 7 years. And that they would receive that for 7 years regardless of whether or not the student stayed in or exited the program, but only for 7 years. And it's an effort to say, let's be really intensive over the course of that 7 years. And when we look at research, it really indicates that it takes about 7 years for students on average to become proficient with English in a way that will give them access to content in school. So it would be that kind of language acquisition. If a student comes in and is a level 3 or 4, there would be 4 years of the extra 0.6 funding, and only 4 years because they wouldn't have as far to go. They would clearly have better English skills when they entered. The extra, and again, the extra weight is claimed even if the student exits. So if the student was level 1 but exited in 4 years, the district would be allowed to continue to receive the extra 0.6 for 3 years, even though there would not be service provided. The districts are required to spend at a minimum of 90% of the extra weight on ELL students within this program, which would be a really new and different situation as compared to anything that's ever happened in the state school fund formula previous. And lastly, the district would receive an additional $250 incentive when an ELL student who was ever identified as ELL graduated from high school. So if they're identified in kindergarten and they exited in 5th grade, 7th grade, whatever the case may be, when they graduated, the district would receive an additional $250 because they once were an ELL student. Anna, if I get a question.
Yeah, the question, so currently they get weight for an ELL student. What's the mandatory spending for ELL students for districts?
There's no mandatory spending. It's an allocation. It's not a dedication.
Okay, so what if, instead of trying to do something like this, we tell them, we're giving you this money for ELL, now use it for ELL. That's a huge issue across the state that I've heard from ELL's teachers all over, and I saw it play out in Beaverton, that money was not spent for those students that it was intended. So I see now we're telling you have to spend 90% of it. If the weight is for those students, then it's appropriate to use it to make sure they are provided the education. So I would be interested before even looking at this in districts telling us what percentage that you are receiving are you actually using at this moment in time.
Right now, there's about $121 million, 141. It's about 100. We did a little research. There's $141 million that currently is allocated in extra half weight, and there is about 100. Pardon?
130 out of it.
130 of it. So there's about $11 million currently that is not being used. So it's over the 90% mark. But if we're going to increase funding, we need to make sure that we at least maintain that 90% mark.
That's an interesting number that you just shared. That data is not what I hear.
So there could be some parameters about how you identify if it's being used for an ELL student or not. We might need to tighten that up a little bit. I don't know, but that's what our current research shows us about probably that.
Just point out in the funding formula, it was never designed to be a prescriptive budgeting tool for districts. It was designed as a way to allocate, recognizing different students have different costs, and the district should have a lot of flexibility. This proposal, and again, when you think about the things like dual immersion and how you account for dual immersion, which I think is a pretty effective, as I understand it, a pretty effective model for English language learning, how you account for costs in the context of a dual immersion school is a little complicated, to put it mildly. So I think we have to be pretty careful to prescribe spending. But what we can do is get really clear on outcomes. And there's a lot in this proposal. This is exciting what you're doing, because I don't know if this is the right proposal, but I think it's the right idea to be focusing on it in a different way, to create the right conditions for accelerated learning.
And it is a proposal. It's really difficult when you start talking about ELL to wrap your head around it. So we know right now that ELLs graduate about 59.81%, but we also have some really interesting information about if we can get students to exit ELL status prior to high school. They actually graduate at a higher rate than non-ELLs within 5 years. So it's about 2.7% higher than non-ELLs, and the dropout rate for those ELLs also goes down compared to those students who are never ELLs.
That's great.
So really interesting data. Certainly it improves intensity just because there's a 7-year window for funding. It provides some additional resource. Certainly the winners would be those districts that have additional ELLs, and there are a number of equity considerations within this. I do think it's important to point out that it would add, this is not new money, this is redistribution of money. And it would add 6,700 ADMW to the state school fund formula, which is a redistribution of $45.8 million. it's a significant redistribution compared to the ninth grade credit earning that I identified. So it's a significant redistribution of resource. However, it does take that resource to students who have not graduated the same way as other students, and it gives them an opportunity to be more likely to be exited prior to that eighth grade, important eighth grade date.
Okay, any,
That'll be an
Chris?
interesting one.
Yes, it
I think there are a lot of, was there any of our ELL, we have an equity group, ELL, I'm trying, David Batista, did he work on this proposal?
David and I talked about
David,
it.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. He and I have talked about it a couple of different times. He's given me some feedback, and we need to do some more work for sure.
But, I mean, I don't know what your expectations are, Mr. Chair, but I mean, this is one, it's well worth, I mean, I don't know, again, I don't know if this is the right specific, but putting intense work on this, I think, I'm so glad you brought this forward. It's a huge think differently about how we are serving this population.
And two different proposals that actually had consensus.
Yeah, I'm so glad.
So we should, you need scurry.
Yes, I see I have
Yep.
the person wanting to
I
tell me
know.
over.
Janet,
I know. Okay,
All right.
thank you
thanks.
very
Okay,
much,
sorry.
Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
okay.
So
Iris.
now, actually, I think, do we have the
What?
QEC up next?
No, you have.
Or do I have Iris?
No, Iris.
Oh, okay. I may have accidentally switched that around when I emailed you, Iris, but you're up.
So what did you do? They have copies of mine?
They have copies of everything that you sent.
Because I don't have a copy.
So we have your four templates, Iris. So if you all look in your packet, you'll see strategies,
As long as you're there.
3 strategies numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes.
This is my backup information.
Okay.
So let me begin by kind of giving you a little background, because we're, the Youth Development Council and the division are in somewhat of a different place, I'll call it that, than everyone else at the moment. We are currently continuing to fund the old system. We are continuing to fund the old system. So we have not as yet begun to make any investments in the new system based on the recommendations that the council has put forth in its new funding allocation plan. House Bill 3132 put forth a new funding allocation plan for the Youth Development Council based on the old funds that were in the old system that were then reappropriated into the new system. But the legislature gave the old system one more year to continue to fund the programs and services that they're funding. And we anticipate that we will have funds invested in new systems in September of this year.
This year.
Yeah. This year. In addition to that, as I kind of walk you through this, you're going to see some places where we have also had to continue to take funding out of our current system in which we had made recommendations and continue to fund the old juvenile crime prevention system as well. So much of our funds, in terms of the investments that we're making, are yet to be made, and some of those funds are still earmarked for old systems. just so you know. So let me just sort of walk you through the 4 investments that we are making based on the strategy, the community investment strategy, and that background information that I have there for you, which is based on opportunity and priority review. So the first one has to do with our youth and community investment. And our youth and community investment was actually, the strategy aligns with the work of the Oregon Education Investment Board, supporting out-of-school youth in investing in regional collaboratives and in transformational innovative practices that we're trying to take a look at. Now, the investment itself is around opportunity priority youth, and sort of here give you an explanation of who they are. We have done a considerable amount of research on Opportunity Youth. The White House put out a paper not too long ago on Opportunity Youth. And these are youth who are 16 to 24 who are neither in school or working. They have been called disconnected, they have been called disenfranchised, they have been called by any number of names. But because we are looking at how to help these young folks get on track, we see an opportunity. And so that's why they're called Opportunity Youth. There's an opportunity to re-engage them, to get them back in school. In the country, there are about 6.7 million young people who fit this definition. They have about a $7.3 trillion impact on the economy because they're not in any systems, and they're impacting our other systems, our health systems, our juvenile systems. They're impacting many of our systems. As a result of that, we've taken a look at who these young people are in the state of Oregon, 16 to 24, and 1 in 7 young people in that age bracket could be considered Opportunity Youth. About 66,000 young people in this state represent that same particular group. We have also began to focus on another group of young people called priority youth. These are youth between the ages of 6 and 15. They're in school, marginally connected, if not given the educational supports, if not given the kinds of tools that they need, they will become Opportunity Youth. And so our council has chosen to sort of focus on these two groups of young people and to make our investments in those young people with respect to the funds that we do have. I'm trying to make sure I stay with your questions here. So our strategy for basically improving them is to take a look at what we've been calling indicators of need. Instead of looking at an old system of 0 to 17 population-based formulas in which we simply allocate money out to counties based on the population of young people, the council itself said we need to be looking at two things: indicators of need and equity. How do we ensure that those young folks who fall into those categories of opportunity and priority are actually the ones that we are focusing on and actually the ones that we're trying to make the investment in terms of what the needs are? So you'll see on page 2 a series of indicators that we have put in place and that we've done some research on that says basically that these are the kinds of community level data pieces that we need to be looking at in order to target these young people. These particular areas, in terms of when we talk about these indicators, in terms of what the research is saying, is they're less likely to succeed in career or in education if they do not. You
Just trying to think, sure.
You have the right one?
Strategy number 1.
Strategy 1 or
Strategy 1, page
Strategy
2.
1, page
Top on the
two.
page.
Different one, that's what I was.
Yeah,
It
there's
says
four.
at the top right here, youth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I see, okay.
yep.
Yeah, the strategy 1. So, okay.
There are 2 strategy ones.
There
Okay.
are
Are
all
there
kinds
two
of
strategy ones
strategy
in here?
ones.
So that's
There's
strategy,
strategy
so
two.
it's, okay,
The
got it.
title is the right.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, so I'm sorry. There's,
Yeah, they weren't in order, so that's, I think, the confusion.
Okay. Okay. So what we have done, and this sort of goes back as well, is that we have moved forward putting out into the community our application for grants. And those grants are out right now. The applications are out. People are working on them. They have a deadline of June the 16th to get those back in. And they're looking at these types of community level data and the type of individual data that they can collect. We looked at community level data and we tried to target and make sure that communities had the capacity to collect that data. We didn't want them having to have researchers or evaluators or folks who have to go out and be paid to collect the data. This data is kind of readily available in their communities, or they can get it through the census, they can get it through the school district, they can get it and they can have access to it. So this is what we're basically doing. We're soliciting the applications now. What we will do is, as the applicants go through the process and we award the grants, we will be negotiating the outcomes with the grantees or the awardees, so that they align with both the OEIB's strategies as well as with the ODE strategies. We kind of want to align and roll up to ODE strategies in terms of what they're looking at. And we kind of do that with respect to a couple of their goal areas as well, in terms of community engagement and in terms of comprehensive systems where every student can learn and every student is successful. So that's what we're going to be doing in terms of taking a look at the strategies and how we set up our outcomes with folks moving forward.
Can I ask just a quick clarifying question? So that's your strategy that you're putting in place now for the current biennium, and is the recommendation that the strategy would be the same in the next biennium, that there would be?
Right, because what we're having here, this is a 10-month window. Because we're only going to be able to put investments into the community starting in September, we only really have a shorter time in this particular last year, the biennium, to actually put these out and to work with folks. So then, within the context of the full biennium, we would then have the outcomes in place.
And there wouldn't be another RFP process in the following?
No, there will be another RFP process for the full year, so that we can have a full biennium. This is just one of these interim years based on how we have to continue to fund the old system. So given that this is this interim year, we're at least putting the applications out, engaging those folks, engaging the awardees, taking a look at what kinds of outcomes they produce, with the understanding that they would definitely be reapplying within the 15-17 year for a full biennium. And encouraging that in terms of the kinds of outcomes. So we'll have a little bit of a window to really take a look at how the folks are doing in terms of their outcomes and the kinds of results that they're getting. And either providing technical assistance or saying, because what the council has said within the context of the biennium, if folks aren't actually achieving those outcomes, we will not necessarily invite them to apply.
Quick question,
Yeah.
just clarifying, how much money we're talking about, and
Okay,
who are the recipients generally, the kinds of people?
Okay, so the recipients would be community-based programs and services for activities such as mentoring, before and after school programs, homework
So
clubs,
nonprofits,
boys and girls
basically.
clubs.
Yeah.
Nonprofits, those who
Yeah.
will be supporting the outcomes that
Right.
we're trying to achieve. So those are the basic.
And the amount of money is what?
Amount of money. So in this particular, I think I have that on one of these pages.
6.4 number 6.
Yeah, in this particular strategy, we have about $6.4 million. We had originally about 12, and again, that 5.5 was set aside. So because we don't have access to the 5.5, it's in our budget, but it must go to that other system. So originally, this was a much heftier amount of funding, and some of you, I think, Nancy, you're well aware of what we kind of went through to try and hold on to that funding. But this is what we have for this particular endeavor, and that 6.4 that you see there, that is a biennial amount. So we're only going to have about 3.2 for this particular year. So then, what we've done here, and I think I have a better copy, if you all would like, of the data, of the kind of indicators that we actually are going to be taking a look at with respect to how we're going to be measuring some. This is also in there, but the way it looks in your packet is a little cut. It's a little cut off, and so these are the particular strategies that we have for how we're going to look at this in terms of our equity lens. And so we're looking at, again, at indicators of need, we're looking at statewide averages, and we're looking at, in terms of what's above the statewide average, and how then do we really focus in on, and how do you really get connected to those most in need, and do a very targeted, focused investment in those areas. Trying to keep up with the so I gotta go a little bit faster. So you'll also see on the bottom of page 4, where we begin to talk about specifically how we address equity and cultural competency. And so we have several different places in our applications where we're calling out and asking for specific information. We're asking specific questions. Is the organization and individuals involved in the collective impact approach with respect to the population? Does the community being served have a disproportionately high percentage of the population made up of traditionally underserved individuals? Do the mutually reinforcing activities of collective impact in the community, are they appropriate with respect to culturally specific approaches? So really embedded in the investment strategy itself are the questions that address equity. And so when we get the applications, the scoring mechanisms that we will be putting in place will automatically align with our need to take a look at how we're going to focus on equity and what kinds of outcomes we're going to expect for those particular groups. So
I just have one question about the number of applications that you get. Is it, have you found it to be very competitive, or?
we haven't gotten any applications.
In the past, have you done, no, so this is a first go-around, it'd be very,
Very first go around, we're
Yeah.
kind of anxious to see what actually we get. And remember, we're going to have 4 different grants, so this is just the youth and community grant, and it's a tiered approach. So folks will be applying for the various tiers in the approach and looking for where the best fit for them with respect to what they're seeking to do in the community with respect to the investment.
so some of the programs that have been receiving money are going to be putting in for a grant. And so this is a
Yep.
high-stakes grant.
And we also, and that's why we sort of required the use of the collective impact strategy, and you'll see that in your other document. So we basically said you have to come together in community and do this. No single standalone entity can actually apply. However, if an existing organization that has received this money in the past is actually getting the outcomes, we would expect that that organization may even become the backbone organization for the application itself. In fact, we've encouraged that as we've gone around the state. We've said, those of you who are getting the outcomes, those of you who are actually serving in the community, we would expect that in some instances you would step forward to help bring together the collective impact group that would go after.
And one last question. So you said 6.4 million going out in grants. So we haven't done this in the past.
3.2 for this
Oh,
year.
yeah, but 6 point, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
3.2 for this year. Last year, what were we spending?
Well, last year, we did, okay, so last year we had to go back to the old commission system. All of the funds that went out last year went through the commissions on children and families, so they were block, basically grant type funds, larger numbers and different kinds of funding streams. For example, we had something called youth investment. So there were youth investment funds that went out to the community. There were also juvenile crime prevention funds that went out to the community. There were children, youth, and family funds. All of these different funding streams all went to the counties, and counties then did the contracting with the community-based organizations. So there were various pots of money in those funding streams. So you want to kind of...
So you can't do an apples to apples about the amount of money at this
Well,
point because they were in
that's right,
different
because we sort
buckets?
of changed that up just a little bit, and we've added to some pots. We have a couple of new pots. We have some pots that are going away. Certain things, they're not quite, it's not quite the same as it was.
Okay.
I have
So
one
just-
question.
oh,
Just
sorry.
one question. So if this is proven successful, do you think it will help you to capture some of that money that's currently going out under the old model?
Why
So
don't we
is
just
this-
try to capture that before that?
Okay. So I'm just wondering, it might be a really good argument. Hey,
Oh,
here's a
yes,
model that's way more
absolutely.
effective, and your data, and
Exactly.
let's give it-
We believe that. I mean, I think the council really believes that as well, but we're hoping to be able to try and recoup some of those funds. Much of the conversation that we have with the community, because we spent quite a bit of time going around the state, much of the conversation that we have with the community was about the totality of these funds in communities who had never, ever had access. Remember, the commission system was pretty much a closed system.
Right.
It went to the county commission, and the county commission decided to do whatever it was. Now you have nonprofits, community-based organizations, folks who never had access, actually having access and looking very much forward to showing and proving that their particular program activities were supporting young people, particularly a lot of the before and after school programs, a lot of the mentoring programs, who never had access to these funds.
So we're gonna have to speed it up a little
Okay,
bit.
speed up.
Sorry.
So again, our research, our evidence, we do have some shortfalls in our, I would say this, in our data. As we take a look at the populations, we've looked at across the board at some of the Native American youth populations in the state. Very difficult in getting accurate data, and we've talked to the tribes and some of the tribal representatives concerned about the numbers and how the numbers are reflective of their populations. We know that the LGBTQ community, we don't have accurate numbers for that particular community. We're working with them to try and ensure that we have good data and good information on that community as well. And so then again, at the back of this, you'll see some of the grant streams. You'll see I'm going quickly because I have 3 more things to get to. You'll see some of the grants. You'll see the tiered approach on page 6 of this.
So maybe, Iris, what I'll ask is to just go through each of the other strategies and sort of describe just the gist of what the strategy is, and then the group has all the material and
so strategy
they'll be able to.
Youth and innovation. Now here's, Hannah, where this might get to some of your questions. So youth and innovation. This is an amount of money, it's about $1.6 million, came out of the old commission system in which between the Early Learning Council and Youth Development Council, some of the children, youth, and family dollars were divided up. So with respect to what the council recommended for these funds was to set up a youth and innovation grant and make an investment. And this had to do with a non-recurrent investment in a community based on a community need. And it had to do with the fact that as we went around, the state, we heard from many, many communities, if only we could do this, we could make that bridge. Or if only we had this ability to do this. In one community, we went into a computer lab, and it was beautiful, brand new computers, just about 30 of them sitting in the room. And so we said, oh great, you're going to have this for they said it was for their after school program. They didn't have the internet connectivity and didn't have the funds to do the lines with respect to the cable, laying the cable, that sort of thing. So we said to them, this is perfect for a youth and innovation grant. It's a one-time, non-recurrent grant to help support your after-school program with respect to your computer science lab. So this is what this particular youth and innovation kind of grant and investment would be. And folks are very kind of keen on it. They understand that it's not ongoing. They understand that it's to build foundation, it's to build out, and perhaps help support their work through other means going forward. Then we have the youth and gangs investment. Now, you may remember that the governor put into our budget towards the end of the last biennium about $1 million for youth and gangs based on some of the activities and things that are going on. Folks think that the gang problem is actually a metropolitan area problem. We have gang activities going on throughout the state. Right now we have 8 pilot sites where we are actually funding support for various stages of gang activity in that particular state. They have to use the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention gang intervention model, and it's a comprehensive model. So that is another one of our funding streams. We used to have about $750,000 in that. But again, we're not talking about a state regulatory process. Here we're talking about those particular communities that recognize and can meet the standard of saying they actually do have. So that's another investment. And then finally, we have, this is our federal funds. These are not state general funds, our youth and crime prevention, which is shrinking. The federal funds for youth development, youth involvement, youth activities from around the state, as well as around the country are shrinking. Our Juvenile Justice Accountability Block Grant, this is the last year of it. The Congress has decided not to continue to fund this particular block grant. So we're seeing over time where there used to be significant amount of funding for youth programs coming from the federal government. Those are shrinking. At the same time, we are not making a significant investment in youth programs in this state. If you take a look at the percentage that we spend, it's less than 40% of any of the general fund in terms of programs, the federal dollars have been what has sustained most of the programs for youth in the state over time. And so there's a concern that as those shrink, we're not putting money back into this investment for youth in the state. So those are the 4 investments that we're going to be making. We're looking forward to seeing what we get from the grant recipients and actually sitting down and doing the negotiation for the outcomes so that they align with both the OEIB and with the Oregon Department of Education.
Thank you.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Iris, thanks so much. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Bet.
Okay, this is, at some point, this is an observation I want to make, and I think we've got to, this is not just for these funds, but in general. The whole issue of the nonprofits and their role in hitting the larger education goals is really tricky, because, I mean, whether it's STEM Summit, where you hear all these nonprofits that can help really drive, whether it's the programs you're talking about.
Or reading.
The reading, and the idea of, so that the response is we should be funding these, but the reality is there are hundreds of organizations at the state level, and for the state to be investing individually, and I understand you're trying to build hubs and so on, but ideally they really should be integrated closely with the schools themselves. And so I don't know if I have an answer, but I mean, if we're trying to achieve the outcomes, what you want are partnerships with the nonprofits and the schools and others in a way that's really tight at the local level. And my worry is, frankly, that, you know, and I see this on the Oregon Community Foundation, if you fund them from on high, then you are creating all kinds of issues around relationships that we've got to think about, and I don't have an answer
Well,
to it.
two things. One of the things that has recently happened is that the Youth Development Council, at least for youth in the state, has been sitting with what we're calling a youth funders group. And so we have the Oregon Community Foundation, we have the Meyer Memorial Trust, we have Collins, we have the Children's Fund, we have all of the youth funding agencies and foundations sitting at the table. We've had 3 meetings, and we're talking about how to develop youth policy and youth funding so that we're all looking at how we do this moving forward. So that's one thing. In addition, the division was charged with taking a look at state agencies that fund youth and youth programs. And so we have a draft document that we've done in conjunction with Echo Northwest that has assessed the entirety of state agencies that fund youth programs to take a look at who they're funding, how much funding, what number of youth served, what kinds of outcomes that they're getting. And so we have that report in its draft stages now and intend to bring that back to at some point.
Yeah, again, that'd be an area really to spend some time on this.
Well, also, and I think you said earlier, Iris, if you structure the requests out and mandate collective responses to those, not necessarily RFPs, it also could be an RFQ,
Right.
a request for qualifications, who are qualified, you know, RACs or whoever could apply. So,
And again, I just also think about the school connections, because I mean, if schools call, I mean, because a lot of this you want to integrate, and if you,
Well, you need to,
we need to figure out how to pull it all together. I don't know the answer.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing some of the data and sharing some of that data with you, because it'll be interesting to see what we're doing at a state level. But it'll also be interesting as we start to talk about our partners who are funders around the state.
That's great,
the next. Oh, perfect.
in 3 different ways.
Thank you.
Thank you.
5
Okay.
different ways.
So thank you everyone for dealing with this quite frantic pace. I knew it would be when we scheduled it, but they're just gonna all be like this, and then we'll have some good work sessions and time to get more information from people as we need to follow up. But so for now, we have Brian Reeder and Doug Wells from the Quality Education Commission. Little bit different assignment for them. We didn't invite them to come and bring priorities, but really to bring some framing, and I know they will do a great job.
It's an excitement, right?
And some excitement, yes. Thank you, Doug.
Well, I'm Doug Wells, Chair of the Commission. Just, what we want to do is give you some historical context about the QEM and the QEC, talk about where we see ourselves going, and then give you a couple of recommendations about what we would like to see. Just briefly, the commission is made up of all volunteers. It includes mostly educators. There's 2 of Oregon's best superintendents are on there, some former teachers and administrators, former legislator, a community college president, some of the U.S. system. It's a very broad spectrum look at education in Oregon, and some great discussions there. And I guess I would note, especially as we look moving forward, that the governor and the legislature over the last 2 to 3 years have brought in members who more represent the P20 system than just the K-12 system as a part of our membership. So that's expanded our conversation. So, can I see that? Talking about historically, I guess I want to start because we lost one of our founders since we put out our last report, who to me embodies the best of what the QEM is and what it can be, and that's Lynn Lundquist, who I always called the godfather of the QEM. To me, he really represented a context that was both sides of the aisle. It was urban and rural. It was pragmatic and visionary, and that he always had kids first and foremost in what he talked about and what he believed in, and that sort of has grounded me and us in our work. So historically, the model has been K-12 only, and it was made. The number was made to estimate the cost of running a high-quality K-12 system and get the outcomes that we desire as a state. Some of the limitations on that is that we know or have known very little about the characteristics of kids as they come into kindergarten or even up through third grade until we get any kind of achievement numbers from third grade. And it really doesn't follow kids after high school or know any cost of remediation or other from our K-12 system. So those we feel like are some of the limitations. So how's the model changed? So they originally developed in 1999 in one of the first Kitzhaber administrations. It was a blueprint for effective schools, but it wasn't really grounded in what was happening in Oregon at the time. So over time, we've added some features, or things have changed to add, a base case model, which sort of helps the model capture what's going on in the schools right now. In 2008, we started focusing more on some best practice work, which included looking at matched pair analysis, meaning we would go and look at schools with similar demographics but very different outcomes, and we would try to both compare their numbers but also go literally into the field and talk with the teachers and the principals and in some cases students in the school to find out what was going on, to try to sort of better determine what best practices look like in the field.
Well, but the first thing that comes to my mind, why are we in the bottom percentile in this grades that we see? We're 46th or 47th in the nation in our education. And what did you? I mean, is this?
Well, I guess in the last slide we'll talk a little bit about what we see, but I think one of the things I believe is that we have pockets of excellence in the state. I mean, we have pockets of best practice, but we have a very challenging time of bringing that to scale or moving that out of those pockets and into the mainstream of the system. So I don't know if that's the only cause, but that is something that we notice.
So I'd just like to add in there
Yeah.
that the QEM is charged with identifying the best practice and then the cost that we would incur if we implemented best practice. And what we have is about $2 billion short of best practice. So when you ask that question, why are we way down here? If we know what we need as best practice to have students be successful, and we don't invest that kind of money in it, then what results would you expect?
What's our per capita per student in relationship to the whole United States, to the 50? I thought we were pretty high per capita.
No, we're not. We
We're not?
used to be, but before Measure 5, we were. We're in the teens, maybe 15, 16.
Gotcha.
We're now in the 30s.
Okay.
So we've gone from a well-funded system to a relatively poorly funded system over that period. And I would also add that those rankings that you refer to, I think, come have come out of some work that I find inadequate.
Unfortunately, though, the downtown, that's what they see.
Well,
in
that's
headlines.
absolutely right, and it's unfortunate. I mean, Education Week is one of those organizations that feels the need to rank states, and I think they, in developing measures that they feel are appropriate for all states, they miss the nuances. One thing that you'll notice is that sparsely populated states in the West, like Oregon, where we have large parts of the state that are very sparsely populated, so we have very small schools. Montana, Wyoming, we spend a fair amount more money in those really small places because they've got really small class sizes. It's expensive to run very small schools. So those states rank very poorly too. And part of the reason is that the methodology that Education Week uses doesn't consider smallness as a cost driver. So they say, well, look, these states are spending lots of money in these little districts, in these districts, well, they happen to be very small, and they're not getting dramatically better results. So we look poor in those kinds of rankings for reasons that I think are a function of things that are mismeasured.
So, what are we working on right now? Well, we are, as we talk about the P20 context, which is, over the last few years, that's become more and more what we all talk about. We are starting to look at, pre-K component and a post-secondary component of how we add that information into our findings, into what we report out to the governor and the legislature. We have added an equity stance to our work, which mirrors what the OEIB has adopted, and we believe that that's a critical piece of being successful in our work and knowing what drives quality in the state. And Brian will talk more about this, but we're supplementing the model of costing to be more focused on students and looking at some of the longitudinal data that Peter and others are working on to really track at the student level over time how things are going and drawing some conclusions from that. So a question could be, why would we want to expand this model to be more P20 than just K-12? Obviously, the stated goal in the state is 40-40-20. It's a P20 system. It's integrated. There's clear evidence on both ends of that spectrum in the early childhood and post-secondary that they have a dramatic, early childhood has a dramatic impact on K-12. So to not look at that doesn't give us a full picture of K-12, if nothing else. And we believe one of the places that we can add value is that there's not a lot of systemic places where we're looking at the ramps, what I tend to call the ramps, from early childhood to K-12 and from K-12 to post-secondary. And we have people looking at those silos, if you will, but the ramps sometimes get lost. And we think that there's a lot of opportunity and danger both in those ramp areas and around best practice and how we do the work.
So, when you say expand, what do you mean? I mean, I know what I would mean by that, which would be very exciting. What do you mean by that? I mean, are you saying having the QEC model, the costs of early childhood as well as the universities and community colleges have a database, so we have one measurement system both for cost and outcomes?
Yeah, I think that's been what we've talked about to a certain amount at the QEC. I think the logic is that initially the logic was, well, it's really hard to know what to expect in the early grades of K-12 if you don't really know what's going on in pre-K. So at a minimum, we want to understand how well the pre-K system is working, what kind of skills kids have when they reach kindergarten, what they need when they reach kindergarten. The kindergarten assessment is going to be a big help in understanding that. It may logically lead to trying to incorporate a pre-K costing model in QEM. We've sort of built an early version of that to look at. Some of the work around the country shows that high-quality pre-K that has licensed teachers, that does a really good job in pre-K programs, has payoffs that last. I mean, they've followed the kids in the programs that initiated in Ypsilanti, Michigan. They followed those kids for 40 years. And the impacts on criminal behavior, on voting, and civic engagement, on income are just dramatic and undeniable. So, trying to incorporate early learning aspects into the K-12 model, we think it will pay really good dividends. Now, at first blush, it may look like it's outside the charge of the QEM, but understanding the inputs to K-12, and those kids are the key input coming into the K-12 system, is critical in knowing what to do in K-12. Similarly, understanding how the outputs of K-12, kids heading off into either into work or into higher ed, is really critical for the success of those systems and the success of those kids in later life. So, the limiting ourselves to making estimates for K-12, we haven't interpreted as limiting us into ignoring, the information that we can use from before and beyond K-12 to help us do a better job. The integration of the data systems, I think, is going to take us a long way along.
Yeah, I mean, so my perspective on this is, again, it's hard to remember that after Measure 5, we had absolutely no data on how schools are spending their money in any consistent way. And then Governor Kitzhaber said we're going to have a common database for K-12 systems, so I can go look at my elementary school, compare it with the elementary school across the state. We have all that, which then became the core of the QEC to figure out how to populate it. And Brian can run numbers if you want a class size of the following. We can tell you what it's going to cost the state to do it, and that's an incredibly powerful model. We don't have for higher ed or community colleges. So we have an incredibly rich data system on the cost as well as on the results of the K-12 system that simply does not exist in the rest of the system. And I hadn't really heard you, Brian. We might want to think, Nancy, about giving that assignment in one place and having the whole system modeled. It would be really powerful. Because again, we should be able to compare what a high school seniors cost versus a first year at the community college. What do we think the delivery system costs? We could start really getting into a whole lot of interesting conversation about where to put additional dollars if we had a better understanding of how the current system we're spending on the current system and what we think of an ideal system might cost. So I love this idea.
It'd be easier for support too.
It really, because to have because I'm talking with Ben about this, but for the heck, we're going to need something like this, and this might be a great opportunity to pull the team together and do it all at once.
And a focus on the student.
With a focus on the student, exactly.
If
It ties to the longitudinal database. And then
if your goal is, if you goes to focus on the student in order to best serve the student, the barriers between pre-K and kindergarten and between 12th grade and higher ed or the work world are really artificial barriers that we've put in place. And, this is a chance, particularly being able to follow those kids with our data system really is an opportunity to make some tremendous differences here, I think. So,
Brian, just history. Before this year, has there been talk about a post-secondary QE?
There actually,
there's something
there
there,
was
very different,
but I want to know.
It's not the same.
right.
It wasn't the same.
How that.
Yeah, there was actually a post-secondary quality education commission a number of 4 or 5 years ago, and they did some very interesting work, and the department and the QEC cooperated with them on a number of things, data issues, and thinking through certain models of funding and so forth. But it didn't. My take is it didn't have a huge impact on people's thinking. It's still, their work is still available, and I think we'll probably revisit it because there's some real good thinking done on the challenges of funding a system that's largely tuition-driven as opposed to one that's fully publicly funded like K-12 is. They're very different. There are also students who are choosing to be in higher ed as opposed to K-12
Right.
is not.
So there's still the capacity within that body to do work around post-secondary.
Well, I don't think that
It doesn't
I don't think
exist
the
anymore.
commission itself exists anymore, but their work is available.
Yeah.
What doesn't exist, the QEC, what's the big thing about the QEC from the beginning is the model, is the data. That we can look at K-12 schools and estimate what it costs once you decide what you want your model school to look like, to say this is what the formula would be. We don't have the equivalent in higher ed. We can't say, we think that the community college system should cost this, and you can allocate tuition and state support. But we don't have a way of determining what we think is a reasonable amount to invest in a university or a community college, and nor do we in early childhood. So we're really flying blind in
Right.
a lot of ways on those areas, in a way that, I understand the frustrations people have with the QEC at the K-12 level, but we don't have anything equivalent in these other two systems.
And no models.
No models of what a best practice looks like.
So just to do a time check,
Sorry.
it is actually for, I will propose, if people are okay with another 5 or 10, that we ask these guys to do their sort of recommendations piece, and then we do have 4 public testimony,
Okay.
which would be about 8 minutes.
I was looking at that
apologize.
clock. No, I was looking at that clock there, that's a little bit slower, so.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
right on.
Well, I have
I'll
it
look
over
at
there.
That one's right.
Well, yeah, it's
There.
10 to 8
That
according
would
to
be
that one.
And Duncan's going to be and Hannah's going to be driving 3 miles an hour through Wilsonville.
So anyway, so if you guys
Yeah, I
want to sort of do your
So,
last,
yeah, I'll just finish up here. I think that the commission in general, although I point out that we haven't taken an official vote on this, but I think in general the commission thinks it sort of favors this notion of considering pre-K and post-secondary as part of the work that the commission does, and I think maybe some of them would even argue that we convert the QEC into a P20 organization. But the commission faces a lot of challenges. It's a volunteer commission. We haven't had a budget for probably the last 4 or 5 rounds. So we've been operating some rounds on no money at all. Some rounds the department has given us a little bit of money. In this round, the department gave us $100,000, and we use that for some consulting work in part of the best practices research that we did. And this year it was around college readiness, and we'll have some results of that in our report that's coming out in August. And the way, and I think these maybe words ought to be broken by Doug, but I'm going to say them anyway. Our system is vision-rich, but implementation poor. And I think the QAM sees its role as, I mean, initially it was viewed as simply delivering the big number so that we could all wring our hands over it. But what I think we've come to see the Commission's role is exploring practices that are promising, and we see a lot of that around the state. Like as Doug said, there's pockets of excellence, and some of them are in the most unlikely places. You'll find really poor rural communities that are just hitting it out of the park, and when you go visit them, it becomes fairly clear why it is. You've got, a dinky little school with 5 teachers, and those teachers are working as a team, and they're so committed to those kids that it's amazing. The kids have great support at home. They have a vision of what they want to do when they get out of high school, and they see the importance of finishing high school. And so we see some really high correlations between low performance low income and certain ethnic groups and special ed. But we do see exceptions to that, and we see that those exceptions can be created. They don't happen by accident. So, you know, we need to understand that better, and that's, the commission sees itself as being a key part in understanding that better. And I'll point out that when the model was first built, we had a lot of good data, but it was aggregate data. You know, the financial data is still, by its nature, aggregate data, but we have 11 or 12 years of individual student data now, and we can now follow kids over time. You know, some of the work that Rob mentioned about kids who finish or who exit ELL status before high school, graduate from high school, very high rates. We can discern those things in the data now because it's longitudinal. So we're now in a position to build what I call a performance model in these slides, something that the commission has, as part of our charge, to link performance with resources. But until we got this longitudinal data, that was very hard to do. Now we can do that, and so we can really look at how different investments affect different kids, and if it affects them in the early grades, we can estimate what the impact of that is on later grades, on what it is on high school graduation, and what it is on college persistence. It just opens up an immense amount of work and information that we haven't really had before, that I think is a game changer in a lot of ways. But what that really means is that the QEC needs to be sort of more of a professionalized or professional organization. Right now it's, you know, strictly volunteer with a relatively small amount of staff support from the department.
Right now, it's Brian.
And Brian's off. And, you know, beefing that up, I think, would pay off rather well. So that's the short version.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Can I ask a
Good.
quick question? So the governor wrote a letter to the QEC. I'm just wondering if there's any response to that, or if there's, it's part of your recommendations?
We do plan to address some of what he talks about in our report in the summer. I mean, I think what he points out to us is that, you know, some of the limitations of the QEM is that it doesn't address local versus systemic control very well. It doesn't really give legislators a lot of tools to make decisions about funding levels based on different scenarios that happen. And I think that, you know, I think part of what we're talking about, this P20 view, plays into this. I mean, if you don't have the P20 view, then you can't really get to what he's trying to get to.
And I guess what I would add to that, what I took away from his letter, the main point was that he wants to look to QEM as a tool to identify trade-offs. So what are the trade-offs if we invest in early reading as opposed to ninth grade on track? Now, they both cost money, and they both pay off in terms of improved outcomes for kids. Which one, you know, at the margin, which one makes the most sense if you have limited resources? And I hear that we do. Where's the best place to spend, you know, $200 million extra dollars? What are the trade-offs first, in terms of where to spend it? And I think the QEM has been a good tool to do that. I think we're on the verge with having this really rich longitudinal data set to make it a really good tool to do that.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Coach.
Yeah, I just think, you know, the only thing, and I think I mentioned it at one of our other meetings, a lot of people talk about the QEM as the number, and I really think we need to get away from talking about it as a number. It needs to be, this is research-based, this is what learning conditions need to be in place for students to be successful. And it just so happens, when you cost it out, this is what it costs. Because if you want Oregonians to understand what quality learning environment will look like when we get there, They need that information. So I think it's important that we not lose sight of, it's more than a number. It's about providing for our students.
Well, and I guess the other thing, I totally agree with that. And what I think we haven't done a really good job of doing is saying, if we add resources and if we use them wisely the way the research tells us is effective, that the payoff from that is very large. And that part often gets lost. Well, it's $2 billion more dollars, but the payoff of that, and some of the things that Mr. Whitnell talked about, lower corrections costs, lower social service costs elsewhere, those are all savings that make that make that $2 billion shrink and look smaller and smaller because, and I mean, I think that's the real lesson of the Ypsilanti study is that, those kids, when they get to be adults, are employed, they're productive, they're not in jail.
You can buy a car?
So, I mean, we often forget about those benefits.
Kids don't buy cars anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, good, thanks, guys. Okay, can you give us we had a written from Rex Birkenholder.
Yes.
Written, so that'd be
Yeah.
on the record, so.
Yeah. Do you want to
Yes.
call the name? So we'll start with the second one.
Okay, Lori Weimer? Weimer?
And we're going to have about 2 minutes per person, and just come right on up to the table. Angela will kindly tell us when 2 minutes have gone by. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori Wimmer with the Oregon Education Association. I think I can probably do this in less than 2 minutes. I'm here on behalf of our 43,000 members in pre-K to community college public education. And it's my privilege to share a little bit about our thoughts on the quality education model and the commission and its work. We've been following the commission since its inception 15 years ago. We've participated on the cost panel, we've participated in communications projects about the report, and on a number of other projects, including lobbying for increased funding or maintenance of existing funding during the hard years, and also, and most importantly, the independent integrity of the commission as a body that is about research-based, evidence-based, look at educational best practices and what it would cost to deliver 90% of students to benchmarks. And I think that's an important distinction. 40-40-20 assumes 100% delivery. This is QEM is about 90%. We intend to testify before the Quality Education Commission ourselves, but we just wanted to say that some of the slides in this presentation today give us some pause because it appears to be that there is a bit of a turn in direction and mission with respect to the performance funding comments that have been made. We think that the mission is well laid out in the statutes and that it is about figuring out what the best practices are and how much it costs to fund them. And that's pretty much the job of the commission, not to identify best practices and specific targeted strategic investments and so on. That's the work of this group and of the OEIB, and to do so would constitute some redundancy from our perspective. And so a little disappointed that some of the tone is that the former commissions didn't do their job well enough, or that of new data, we can't do what the mission is, and we want to make sure that the legislature's 2001 legislature, which created this commission, is that there's some fidelity to that statute.
Thank you.
For your time.
Dr. Dago, is that how you pronounce that?
Dapo?
Dapo? He's not here.
He's here.
Is he here? Oh, I see, okay.
I know you're getting ready to go home, right?
Thank you for sticking with
You
us.
drive for a long time, as we do.
Traffic is bad right now, so take your time.
Yeah, I was just thinking that I was appointed to Commission on Black Affairs by T.A. Goldschmidt, Roberts, and Kisaba. So I know I drove so much from Portland to this place. One day, Dr. Golden, I was so tired. The rest space I went in there and parked there and put my feet on my steering. I slept almost 2 hours. Yeah, well, it's always good to be with you. I am a non-profit organization. I work with the African American predominantly. Now it's a multicultural setting. I'm interested in your, if you look at this, I want you to talk to me, that's where I am. If you get this sheet, it says K3 reading. If you look at it, and you will go to, you don't have page in there, the reading, the reading or exceeding, you're going to be looking at that. But your question here, the equity lens questions. Who are the racial / ethnic underserved groups affected? What is the potential impact of the resource allocation and strategic investment to these groups? An incredible question. Then you come down to your answer here. Then I'm looking for those who really monitor that. Who are the people looking the result? Who are the people getting their hands dirty? I am so appreciative of Dr. Kisaiba for bringing this group together. I'm still working on it. I want to find out what to do specifically. I'm sure you're going to be talking more and more. The accountability of our resources, what is happening to it. But I am into the kids, to the black kids. What is happening to them in this country that I have become part of. An incredible nation. These kids languishing in prison. That's how I got into what I do.
That's 2 minutes.
I spoke about that last time I was here. I came here, I'm a doctor, a social psychologist from UC San Diego. I moved here. We relocated under Reagan. I got a little job through the Metropolitan Human Relations Commission. And the job happened to be for me to monitor the suspension rate under Dr. Prophet. I didn't know anything about African American issues. We Africans tend to come here, we mind our business, get education, return back home. But for me, I don't go back anymore. So out of nowhere, I got a call from OSP right here in Oregon, in Salem here. I didn't know anything about Salem. Oregon State Penitentiary, me, to come and speak to the black group. Black men waiting for me to be spoken to. In their blue jean, in prison. That's how the hell broke loose for me. That's what I've been doing since 1986. So, but I am now into, you see, we are good people. It's a good nation. We are not bad people. Based on my own, coming from that little community in Africa somewhere, here I am, a well-established entity, a doctor. Children, my two sons went to Stanford, Santa Clara. The last one went to PSU and then became, what do you call it, the Saints, and what do you call the football stuff. Professionally. My son, for God's sake, in America. Yeah.
Doctor, we need to wrap it up here if you can, please. You need to wrap this up if you could, please.
Okay. But then looking at these black Americans, black kids, into the gangs, killing each other. So where is everybody? So how do we get here? How do we answer this question? That's where I'm going. How do we answer that? This specific group.
We answer it by Nancy making the big bucks.
Oh, okay. All right. But I mean, she's saying it though. She's saying the right stuff to us. That's why I follow her everywhere. you know, I'm going to be following her everywhere she goes because I want to hear more about what she's saying and then how we do it.
So Dr. Gappa, why don't you and I get together, because there's 2 more people to testify, and it's supposed to be
Okay.
3 minutes, so I would love to spend some more time.
Okay, we need to do
answering
that,
those
yeah.
questions.
But that's where I am.
Thank you very much.
That is well articulated, it's well documented, but we want to be the doer. Okay.
Thank you.
So much.
Okay, Alan Mackey?
In view of the time, I'll defer until a later meeting because my comments relate to what's going to be coming up this week.
Okay, thank you. Jen Anderson?
Thank you. I like what Mr. Reader said about the student. And I've been volunteering in the school system for about the past 10 years. And I see the individual students treated in a blackboard way in the classroom is not working. From a horseback point of view, I see success in KIPP, which has extra time, and one-on-one tutoring. I see success, the same students going from 2 grades behind to 1 grade ahead in 3 years, and junior high school in activity with extra time and one-on-one tutoring. At King, we have extra time, but we don't have the one-on-one tutoring, and it doesn't seem to be effective at all. So I think we need that one-on-one tutoring we used to have under Dr. Profit, and we cut it out when we lost money in Proposition 5, and I think we need to reestablish it.
Thank you.
Jim, can I ask you one question, Jim?
Yeah.
Who taught you penmanship?
I'm 87 years old. I got C in penmanship.
Well, somebody, who wrote this for it? Who wrote this on there?
I did.
That's what I thought.
We had to know penmanship.
Wow.
Thank you.
Pretty good. Okay, anything else here? Is it good? Thank you. Okay, we're adjourned.